guess without further ado, let me sort of get a screen share started. Kicking things off, I guess, just with the slides we had available. So again, sorry, I do apologize. Technical teething. It's oh, what a joy. Okay. So welcome to our next monthly webinar. Like I've said, I guess I've already explained the new format and the fact that we're going to be talking about recent changes. And where that is starting is with some of, I guess, our API functionality. So recently, we entirely rebuilt the API in Nexus. So whereas I guess about a month ago, you only had API functionality through the classic product, now Nexus has that too. For anyone who's unaware, API is basically just ways of interacting, or a way of interacting with the database. That's adding projects, editing projects, deleting projects sometimes, and obviously any other data item that we have in ProWorkflow, so projects item, contacts, etc. But doing so without the use of the AI. So doing so without the use of the UI. So that might be, you've sort of coded up a JSON call to, react to something happening in a different app and sort of do something in ProWorkflow, add a contact, change something, do something like that. So that functionality is all now available in Nexus, meaning, you can go through and do a whole bunch of things without necessarily needing to be in the tool to do them. Really useful for automation. That's kind of the main thing there. Now, as well as officially releasing, that API, we've also partnered with Zapier and sort of had them understand those API changes as well. Now, for anyone unfamiliar, Zapier is a product by which you can do those API calls without necessarily needing to code things up yourself. So if you're a non-technical individual like myself, it provides some avenues for creating those automations without necessarily having to code up your own JSON calls or whatever coding language you prefer. So Zapier is one to look out for, and do let me know if you have any questions about that in the meantime. This chat, by the way, is enabled for questions should anybody have any. Now the third thing that I can again talk about, but I cannot show you, frustratingly, is our integration with something called an MCP server. So much like the API, this is kind of a way of interacting, with ProWorkflow without necessarily needing to be in ProWorkflow. But MCP specifically, what you're doing is integrating your ProWorkflow with AI functionality. So this is why I'm getting my words mixed up. I've got AI on the brain. But basically, what we've done here is we have, using that MCP connection, basically described what data ProWorkflow has. So an AI could kind of understand it and sort of take a look and say, right, that's kind of what I'm looking at, and this is the data that I'm working with. We have enabled pretty much the full suite of interactions. So whether again that's adding things, editing things, deleting things, the holy trinity, as it were. So that means theoretically you could, once connected to your AI of choice, your language model of choice via the MCP server, you could have it function in a reporting type capacity where you're kind of asking your AI questions about your data. Things like, typically I have a template, I've priced a given item within that template at a certain value, or I've allocated a certain value. Can you go through my project history and maybe see if you have a new hour allocation for me based on averages across a series of projects? Have I costed, have I priced this item correctly? You could maybe get it to do other tasks like, hey, could you go through and any projects that I've completed in the last 6 months, could you reactivate them? And then could you maybe put a check-in task so I can go and check a license or review or go back and, do a customer check-in and run a retrospective. So things like that really depends, I guess, more on your AI model than it does the MCP server itself. But I guess do know that we have expanded our technology, and now AI can kind of understand ProWorkflow's data a little bit better, which is nice to see. Now, as for all of the other things, this stuff is, again, it's reasonably small. It's not too consequential, but it ideally, hopefully, will be helpful nonetheless. So if I do share my window back to our actual project page just here, you should be able to see my screen, and I guess I'll find out once I watch the recording as to whether that worked or not. Hold on one moment. There we go. There's my list back to the side. So, I guess going through the list, this is in no particular order. Well, I guess the order that I collected them was the order roughly in which we released them. So we're going to kind of be jumping all over the tool. Bear with me. But one of the things that we're starting with is you may know that recently one of the big changes with Nexus, specifically with regards to financials, is that we added costing into the system. So now for any given project or item, we can basically go through and establish what we are paying a given staff member to do a given thing. Or maybe if it was a material cost, roughly what was that cost incurred while we did that. And that allows us to assess profitability and a whole bunch of other wonderful things, and we love it, and it's great. The only issue that we realized is that, because we've now got this very sensitive data in the system, and we had everything tied to this one permission called sensitive business info. So you may be familiar with sensitive business info being our kind of catch-all financial permission. Somebody has that, they can see all the financial stuff. We've realized that I guess the information with regards to what you're charging your client is perhaps a different variety of sensitive to what you're paying your staff members. So we have separated those two sort of financial values out into sensitive business info being pretty much everything that refers to revenue generating information. Things like what the charge rates are on the given task, what the total billable values are on a given item, amount remaining to invoice, that kind of thing. And then sensitive business cost rates, that's talking about any time we really talk about the cost rates, pay rates, and what our staff are going to charge. So for instance, if I come into hourly services, cost and charge rate defaults without that permission, that staff member's not seeing that. So yeah, useful for the scenario in which we've decided that somebody, is of the relative, seniority or trusted enough to kind of look at our charge amounts, but maybe, it's inappropriate to kind of show them what everyone's getting paid. Now you have the ability to separate those out. Cool, so that's that one. Moving on to the next, we have added an item field called work in progress. Now, work in progress is calculated based on specifically, hold on, maybe if we come into a given project. Specifically, it's based on the spend amount that you might have for a given item, less the invoiced value. Now, this is keeping in mind, if we come to the glossary here, the spend value, where is it? That's your time spent against the charge rate in the system. So basically, again, what the relative, I guess, client spend, one way to think of it might be. And then if we look at what we have invoiced for that relative item, again, remembering that ProWorkflow is keeping track of, time records and what's been included in invoice and what hasn't, which means we can look at a given item and say, here's how much of this item has been invoiced for relative to the total. And then look at, again, the relative spend. So the spend figure less the invoice figure, that's what's going to give you your work in progress. The closest kind of comparable one might have been the uninvoiced value. So if we do come back to that glossary, sorry, that's a reporting field, my mistake. But yes, we do have a reporting field called uninvoiced, and that is looking at billable. So the total billable value less what has been invoiced already, which might be the same, but is slightly different. And regardless, in the scenario, you can now sort of use different values depending. Cool. One of the other changes that we've made is you may know the timesheet summary located typically on the time page. Quite a handy tool. Just lets you go through, look at all staff holistically. What's the week looking like? How much time has been spent per day? What has that time been spent on? Broadly useful, but it is kind of squirreled away. One of the things that we've done is we've just added it as a quick link to the time page. So just here, can click on that and get virtually the same data from I suppose, more convenient place. Now, if we jump back to items really quickly, this is a reasonably cool one, and I think one people have been asking for since Nexus just about kicked off. But one of the things that we've allowed for is just easier shifting of dates. So if I do have a group of tasks like this, all of which, sort of have their own respective start and finishes, the date section basically used to just let us do set the start date, set the due dates, and so we can go through and sort of set what each of those were. But when it came to bulk movement, it was a bit clunky. So now we have shift dates, and that allows us to basically move dates back or forward by a certain value. Really useful if you have a situation where, say, the remainder of your project, there was some critical bottleneck task, been delayed by a week, so functionally everything's getting kicked forward by a week. Selecting all of your active tasks, kicking them forward by 7 days will do exactly that. Now you can shift by number of days. You can also just choose from a calendar. Depends kind of what you might strictly be looking for there. But again, we have made the bulk movement of dates much, much easier as a result. Cool. This next one is I suppose, still relatively interesting. What we're doing there is that we have allowed for basically time notes to kind of get passed around through invoices. That's a change that we've been making recently. And you'll see here that, as I go through and select my time records, I can copy my time log notes into the invoice. So that just means that any sort of specific things that, have been mentioned, specifically just in the entry as opposed to in the wider item. You might have gone through and said this specific thing was a phone call in which we discussed such and such. That information can now be pulled into the quote. And I suppose more than that, this is the most recent change, those records can also be pulled into the client copy of the invoice as well. So when we sort of do get that preview, they're going to be available, they're going to be there. Unfortunately, this is sort of shifting windows around into a place that you cannot see them. However, I do promise you can go check it out yourself and you will see those time log notes have been pulled in. Now, this next one is granted an advanced feature, but just to, I guess, make things broadly easier for our customers that like using the sort of team and group functionality, we have allowed for, while it was always available as a filter, a grouping option. So now the team and group data that you have specified in your organizational chart can be used as the basis for a sort of grouping in the wider tool, namely the project list page just there. Quite fun to see. Okay, this next one is a little bit, I guess, in the weeds about it, but I think maybe greatly appreciated in some circumstances. But you'll know that in ProWorkflow, you can click into items, you can click into projects, and especially in the description, you can add things like images. Now, as opposed to directly uploading an image, which again, an option, one of the things that you can do is you can actually add an image and then do it from a URL. So this is kind of like the secret sneaky third option. And the main difference is what this will be doing is it'll be referencing a link as opposed to be referencing an internally stored file. These two options are kind of like, do you have a file in the project already? Do you want to upload a file to the project? This one is basically going to ask us for, an image URL. Now that can be done pretty handily. I think this is classed as an image here. It is not, regardless. What you can do is you can often right-click on an image anywhere that you find one on the internet. In fact, maybe my logo will count just up here. There we go, just like that one. Okay. So when you find an image on the internet, you can copy image address. And so if I jump back into my item here, I can then insert image from URL, just like that, and then confirm it. And I guess that is a white logo on a white background. So not something you can see, but you can see that the image got loaded in now. I love it when this stuff happens live. Good deal. But yes, that is reasonably handy. Now, the specific change that we've made is that we've allowed for URLs that functionally exist outside of ProWorkflow to be used here. So prior to that, I guess this probably still would have worked because, it is stored on our URL. So it's information that we would reasonably have access to. Now you can go anywhere in the internet and run that same process. The only real thing that's important to mention is that it won't work for things like PDF. Right now, we're on a live web page. So if I go to, Google Images or whatever, and I grab something from there, I can slam that image in, and anytime I go back to this page, um, the system basically is referring to that URL and going, cool, there's the image. So as long as that image stays live in that location that you opened it from, or you saved it from, you'll be able to see it here. It's just that when it comes to things like PDFs that don't necessarily have that sort of image search based functionality built into them, it sort of won't come through quite as clearly. So something worth remembering, certainly. But it is an easy way to sort of get images into ProWorkflow without necessarily needing to upload a whole bunch of data, which is quite handy. Cool. Handily, the next thing that I'd like to show you is kind of available from the page that we're already on. So from any given text section, whether it's the details or whether it's messages or whether it's anywhere else really, we have allowed so that you can do, I guess, keyboard-based shortcuts for tags. So the two that you need to remember is a hashtag is basically to add a new tag in. So in my case, the tags I have available are issue, feedback required, documents ready for review and to be assigned. I'll use to be assigned, and you see what's happened here. As soon as I've popped that in, the tag has actually been added up the top here. So I can do that again, hit the tag, go documents required. And then as I've done that, documents required shows up. So that's really handy. Especially with regards to messages, if you do have some kind of like documents required tag, that's a good example. And I'm talking to maybe my client, I'm going to say, hey there, Steve. Everything looks great. I just need that one compliance document that you told me you would have. And then I'll put in hashtag document required. And then your item will actually have that value saved. And if Steve is also in the tool, Steve can sort of search up via that tag, filter for it to identify. Or I guess you can use that tag to identify all the instances where you are still waiting for a document. And then when Steve does reply to your message with that document, Steve can go exclamation mark, and then all of the active tags that are currently against this item will appear in this list. You can then choose the one that you want to get rid of. So in our case, we've sent you the document. Here it is. And then you see that tag disappears. So I guess worth noting that the text does remain. So in that sense, especially if this is occurring on, a back and forth message thread, like I guess my scenario implies, you'll be able to sort of see the bits, where the tag was added and removed, etc. So worth noting there. But like I say, now you have that ability. You don't need to directly kind of, after you've sent your message, pop in there and then muck around with the tags that way. Amazing. The next thing that we've got is just some improvements to the file space manager. So it's not necessarily, you may not even know this exists, but right at the bottom of the settings page, we do have functionally, it's just a whole list of the various files that you will have added into the system across all of your projects and across pretty much all of your time with ProWorkflow. So we've added functionally just a search, a filter, a grouping option, and a field editor. So it's kind of looking a lot more similar to, say, the project page or the items page. But a lot more filtering, a lot more functionality, and it's just much, much, much more easy to use. We've also made some optimizing maneuvers, which should theoretically help it to load a bit faster as well, especially when you have a lot of files. That was one of the reported issues with the older system, and that hard to say, when it comes to PC limits and network limits, and it's all reasonably unique per your setup as to exactly how fast you're going to get. But per the software changes we've made, it should be at least a little bit faster than it was. So that's that one. File space manager. Now, one of the other ones, this is a really tiny thing, to be fair. But one of the things that we have added for our clients is just the title and position field. So it's nothing major, but at the same time, it does give you the opportunity to kind of specify who you might be talking to. And I think as well, when you have sort of groups of staff talking to groups of clients, one of your staff members might know that you're talking to the CFO, but others may not. And so it's nice to just have that written down so that whenever, these conversations do come up, you've got a really clear idea of who you're talking to and what they might know and, I guess what information you can sort of exchange with them. So that's quite nice just to have there. Conveniently, already being on the tasks page, on the contacts page, my lord, the next thing that we can talk about is contact tags. So these were kind of a holdover from the classic system, and so contact tags have been a thing in Nexus for a little bit now. So on the staff section and the client section, you can look at a given company, just tags there. You can look at a given individual by clicking into, say, Gemma Filoni's profile here, also tagging available on that level. And yes, that's been a thing for, I think, at least a few weeks now. But the most recent change that we've made to that tagging system is the fact that now you can actually search for them as well. So using the filters in the project page, you'll see that contact tags is now an available option. So that's going to work on the basis of whoever's assigned to the various sort of project item, whatever it might be. We can go in here and we can sort of filter for that assignment, but then also what tag was attached to the assignment. So it's kind of like I guess there's a couple of layers of searching to this one. And it depends as to what you've used contact tags for, as to how useful it might be. But for instance, I have a vendor tag here. So it might be that I have a sort of maybe a client profile, maybe even a staff profile that I've set up that has vendor attached to it. I've then assigned that to a number of projects, that contact to a number of projects. And now I want to go through and see how many projects that I do have require vendoring services. And then that's how I could create that list. So worth, I guess, doing some re-examining maybe with regards to contact tags and maybe having a think about, yeah, what are ways that you could use them? What are some ways that you might be interested in? Given that you can now filter for them. Because remembering as well that as soon as we've made these filtering choices, we can set up entire views and then entire pages around, those filtering options. So if you do, want to use the contact tag to really identify something important, you can create that. You can have that as a filter, create that as a view that everyone can see, and then slam that as a page in your sidebar. And again, it'll be pretty much impossible for any given member of your team to not know something exists, sort of via that method. Cool. The next one that I had here was timesheet coloration. That means a couple more options, I guess, have been added to timesheet coloration. You may already be familiar that if I come into my timesheet page here, I can come into settings and I can choose what the color grouping is. So critically, main thing that has happened here is that we've added the billable status. So that lets you identify basically which of your time records are billable and not billable. So we don't let you actually set the colors, mind you. We do just have defaults built into the back. But it does mean that, yes, billable and non-billable time will be of two distinct colors, which is nice to see. Although, unfortunately, I guess I would need to do some item editing to make sure that that was a non-billable task. So, well, unfortunately. But like I say, if you do sort of just want to jump in and sort of get like a high level view about, okay, where does everything lie? That's a good way to do it, especially if you're more of a visual person. Because granted, if you're more of a numbers spreadsheet kind of person, we do still have a report that is specifically available for looking at billable time. If you do, I guess, prefer the table layout. But if you like colors, we've got an option now for you too. This is another small one that we've kind of added in here. Glorious test data. But the completed pages will basically now let you filter by completed date as well. So of course you can just go and use, reports to do all of this kind of filtering, but it is kind of handy, on these completed pages just to be able to go through and say, sure, I want to look at completed stuff, but specifically I'd like to look at things that I completed, within a certain date range or within a certain time period. Just changes things up slightly. For instance, when I was going back and, finding the items to that we'd released to talk about today, I did a similar thing. So I went through and I looked back at all of the items we've done, all of the things that we've completed, all the things that we've released, and I just sort of wanted to see the stuff that we'd done within the last, month and a bit, I guess, as compared to our last webinar when we talked about these things. That's quite handy. Next thing that we had is a job template improvement. This will be for the eagle-eyed among you, maybe that no one really noticed. But I consider it an improvement, I'll tell you that much. We've just made it so that you can now create client agnostic templates. So before, when you made a project template, we did kind of say, hey, make sure that you're picking a client that would be tied to, the template, and then if you want to change that later or you want to use that template for a different client, well, you can edit the project after the fact. But we've now made it so that basically, if a project template doesn't have anything to do with a specific client and you just want to keep it generic, you can absolutely do so and just leave off a specific client from that and then use that template, with any given client now. That's nice as well. Now, one of the other things that we've done is just added to some of the restoring functionality. So you might remember that in Classic, if you did accidentally delete somebody, well, on the client's page, we had a way to sort of bring them back, um, as it were. You might notice that that button kind of isn't present anymore, or at least it's not present on the client's page. And in fact, we can do this if I just jump in here. And I'm just going to go ahead and delete this nameless contact now. And the reason I'm going to do that is because now I can go into the audit log and actually show you what that looks like. Although granted, that was a kind of glitchy looking individual, so I'm not sure exactly. Okay, well, it did work. There you go. Somehow they had no name. But you'll see here that when we do delete a contact, we can go into the audit log. We can see that on, today's date and time, we made a delete action. We deleted a contact type, data object. The name of the contact was somehow nothing. The user that did it was me, Natasha. Didn't belong to a certain project because, of course, it didn't. And then right at the end here, we can see that we've got a restore contact option. So hypothetically, if I do want to bring no name back, that is something I can do, which is lovely to see. And I guess very lucky last. We now have no restrictions on the columns editor. What I mean by that is you might have noticed that beforehand, we had some fields in this list that we thought were simply too critical to live without, namely your project and your number field. Sorry, your project and your client field. So these two were sort of by default selected, but you can now get rid of them. The only real restriction that we now have with regards to this kind of list here is the number. So that's kind of the only real fixed line in the sand. Anything else that you want to get rid of or remove, well, we have it there. So I guess, yeah, whatever kind of filtering needs that you do have, or whether it's just clearing space, because you may notice that the title section here does kind of take up more room than maybe it needs to. And in a lot of cases, it might look a bit like mine does, where you've kind of got the same titling being used, or it's like a very formatted title, or maybe it doesn't tell you any more information than the number does if you especially have a client code listed in the left-hand side. So that's that. I guess the first of our monthly fireside chats. So thanks everybody for joining. I guess I'll hold on, rejig the sharing screen so that we're back to our. It's a mild visual, but it's something to look at, I guess. Um, but at this time, does anybody have any questions? Does anybody have anything that they would like to go over, chat about, have a think about? Let me bring up the window again, and I'll just quickly see if there is anything in the chat. Okay, looks like something was noticed. Helpful for us to have that. Love to see it. And thank you. Well, thank you. Thanks for attending. Um, I guess not seeing too many questions, which not expressly a negative thing if everything we've talked about has been clear enough to go through. But like I say, we'll try to basically do these at the end of every month. I'll be rebooking another one shortly, and just going through kind of a larger list of everything that we've done. Sometimes it might be the bigger stuff, like having a new API or having those MCP servers. Sometimes it'll be like we've let you group by a grouping option called group, like it was 2 seconds ago. Real mouthful there. Um, but yeah. Oh, I can see somebody's typing. This is a good time for last minute questions if you do have any. I love these parts. I feel like I'm putting too much pressure on whoever is whoever is typing, for which I can only apologize. But all right, I guess we will call it there, perhaps. Oh, somebody typing again. Helpful updates. Love the updates to messages. Yes. I didn't even talk about those really, to be entirely fair. But yes, new message structure that is available. It's kind of just a list view where you can sort of more helpfully go through things. But no, thank you, Natasha. There is a client called Natasha. I'm not thanking myself. That would be not the move, I think. Okay. Oh well, we'll wrap up there then. But thanks again for everybody for attending. And we will see you on the next one. Amazing. We'll catch you next month, everybody. But thanks again. Bye.